it's safe to say that Game Pass has failed, that PlayStation has failed, that the entire third party collaboration to destroy Nintendo has failed, right? Right now, people are coping and seething about this. They're in denial about this. They have this weird mindset that, the Switch 2 is going to fail, but it's a complete and total cope. We've seen all kinds of narratives be thrown out there over the past couple of days. The big one right now is that, ooh, Doug Bowser used the word diversity in an official statement. Like, but yeah, Nintendo is succeeding. They're catching up to Sony. They will be as big as them in the next 20, 30 years. There's just nothing that you can do to stop it. It's over, essentially. Like, PlayStation and Xbox fail. And the industry has begun to acknowledge that. They've bent the knee towards Nintendo, but right now they're trying to be kind of sneaky about it. They're trying to do this weird thing where they're just we still have Steam. Steam will save us from Nintendo. No. Let's make this absolutely clear going into this. Every PC game, not even just everything on Steam, but everything, on every major platform, on its own individual server, on its own storefront, on it from every developer, every publisher, no matter the genre, the age of the game, the relevancy of the game, everything that is available on PC is also going to be available on Nintendo Switch, right? Any game that has any kind of relevancy at all is going to release on Nintendo Switch and do better on Nintendo Switch. You're going to see this a lot going forward where, every major third party developer is going to do the best on Nintendo. It's going to be a very gradual process as people move away from the inferior PC format, but there is no benefit to owning an expensive PC over a Switch 2, right? And this is going to be very evident to most people. You can already kind of see this with the Switch 1. You can clearly see this actually, how games like Minecraft, Stardew Valley, Terraria have these really massive audiences on Nintendo Switch in spite of primarily being PC games. The biggest PC game of all time, Minecraft, has had successful releases on Nintendo Switch. And I think that really goes to show you just where things are going to go from here. PC games are going to be ported to Nintendo Switch, while Nintendo Switch ports nothing to PC. So Nintendo Switch is the superior platform. Everything is going to be available on that, and some minor third-party releases that nobody cares about will also be available on PC. That is the reality of the situation. PC is an alternative platform. It is something that exists, something that you can technically buy games on, but it's not as relevant as Nintendo consoles. It doesn't have the same caliber of games or franchises, and it doesn't have any relevant exclusive titles. Everything on PC is available in a superior capacity on Nintendo consoles, right? There is simply no getting around this simple fact. It's not an opinion, it is a scientific fact. PC games would have done a lot better if they had launched on Nintendo consoles, right? And you are going to see a lot of this going forward. Recently, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom outsold Baldur's Gate 3 in spite of the industry's attempts at gaslighting you into thinking that Baldur's Gate 3 was some major cultural phenomenon. Baldur's Gate 3 is going to get ported to Switch too, right? It's going to be the best version of the game on Switch 2, right? It's not gonna have like some major influx of like new players who think it's the greatest game ever because Baldur's Gate 3 is shit. But like, it is going to be available on Switch, and as a result of that, Nintendo owners are going to say to themselves that, wow, the greatest game ever made on PC is shit compared to like even mediocre Nintendo Switch games. That's what this is going to look like. Games like Elden Ring are going to get ported to Nintendo consoles, and Nintendo fans are going to try them and realize that, like, wow, this stuff is complete slop. Duskblood is going to come out, and you're going to have people come out and say, wow, this stuff is complete trash. Like it's going to be a reoccurring thing with Nintendo fans. Every time these PC games get ported to Nintendo consoles, you're going to hear a lot of cricket tunes, right? You are going to hear a lot of just deadly silence. Like nobody's going to get excited about The Witcher 3 or Cyberpunk or like any of these other like games on Nintendo Switch 2, right? Cyberpunk 2077 is like actually in a lot of ways a really impressive port on Nintendo Switch 2. And nobody cares, because it is a mediocre release from a mediocre developer that I want to see curl up and die already. I don't care if it's on Nintendo now. CD Projekt Red is and always was a joke. And I will continue saying that even as the game gets an official Nintendo release. Now that it's on Nintendo, PC gamers have no like incentive to like religiously like defend the game. They're gonna have to move on to something else, and that something else is also gonna be ported to Nintendo consoles. Like you see the problem. If these games really were spectacular, amazing 10 out of 10 masterpieces, people would be enthusiastic about them getting ported over. Like we got like Split Fiction is coming to Switch too, I think has been confirmed. Nobody cares. When It Takes Two came out on Switch, nobody cared. When you had like when Elden Ring got announced, like nobody cared. Like these games can't hold a candle to what Nintendo is producing on their hardware near constantly. These games just weren't very good to begin with, and as more and more people begin to familiarize themselves with like these PC masterpieces, more and more people are going to start saying what I'm saying, that like I, that Ultima fans are completely full of it. That nobody cares about Baldur's Gate, nobody cares about like Quake or Doom or Wolfenstein or like any of these boomer shooters. Like people are going to start realizing that like wow, the narrative that PC gamers were having all these crazy experiences on PC that consoles couldn't hope to match was completely untrue. The Legend of Zelda was better than the Ultima games. Like Mario, Metroid, Fire Emblem, like the list goes on and on. Like, Ultima was a giant nothing burger that has left no impact on the gaming world at all. And if those games had ever received a proper port on Nintendo consoles, in fact, a handful of them did in the Super Nintendo games, if these games had actually come out on Nintendo consoles, more people would be willing to come out and speak out against them for not being that great because they would be going up directly against their superior Nintendo equivalents.